I say at the start of every show that this show consists of interviews with people that I suspect have pieces of the puzzle of a world that just might work. My intention is that if you listen to the show a few times, you can begin to see how we could do things differently. Education, healthcare, politics, business, media, community. You may even begin to see a future of revolutionary, evolutionary, and visionary success. That would be ideal. Many of those new ways arise out of a vision that reality is not dead, mechanical, or separate, but that it is alive, evolving, and composed of interdependent systems. And I believe that this worldview has been shared by indigenous people for millennia, revealed by science since early in the 20th century, and obvious every time we either walk outside or look into the eyes of another living creature. It is this worldview that inspires the annual Bioneers Conference that take place each fall in the San Francisco Bay Area and stream onto their website various parts of it at bioneers.org. The conference this year will be October 14th to 16th in San Rafael, and it's a gathering of scientific and social innovators who draw from 4 billion years of evolutionary intelligence and apply nature's operating instructions to develop and implement visionary and practical models for restoring the earth, its communities, and its people. For the most part, the solutions to our problems are already present. Human creativity focused on problem solving can explode the mythology of despair that racks us. And the Bioneers focus on creative social strategies that can help us realize these solutions by restoring community, justice, and democracy. In addition to talking with Kenny Ausubel, who is the co-founder and co-director of Bioneers, we'll also be joined by one of the many social innovators that I first heard at the conference, David Orr. In addition to founding and co-directing Bioneers, Kenny Ausubel is an award-winning writer, filmmaker, and social entrepreneur specializing in health and the environment. He co-founded Seeds of Change, a biodiversity organic seed company. He authored the book Seeds of Change and Restoring the Earth, Visionary Solutions from the Bioneers, When Healing Becomes a Crime, the amazing story of the Hoxsey Cancer Clinics, and the return of alternative therapies. Recently, he edited the first 2 titles in the Bioneers book series with J.P. Harbajni's Ecological Medicine, Healing the Earth, Healing Ourselves, and Nature's Operating Instructions, The True Biotechnologies. Welcome, Kenny Ausubel.
Hey, Terrence, my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. As I always do at the start of my show is try to get a feel for the people behind the work and the ideas that we're going to talk about for the rest of the hour. And so let me ask you this. You started out, or at least you had a period where you were focused on media, when you were focusing on your films and that sort of thing. And then I imagine the conference took over your life. And now it seems that you're also bringing the conference bringing media as a bigger component of the conference. Talk about how that relates to you as a person.
Sure. Well, actually, I didn't really know it exactly at the time, but I got into writing when I was in 4th grade. I went to sort of to Teachers College school, which is associated with Teachers College in New York City, and we were kind of the guinea pigs, for all kinds of experimental education practices. And they gave us typewriters in 4th grade with color-coded keys. And it was this, I have no idea what the experiment was, but it got me started writing.
Uh-huh.
And I kept that through high school and into college. And then I grew up in a household where going to movies was more or less like going to church. I just grew up with a great love of film and all that. And, I really enjoyed communications and media. So I started becoming a journalist when I was in my 20s and kind of stayed at it and then moved into filmmaking. And one film, the major film that I did in the 80s, was a feature documentary called Hoxsey, How Healing Becomes a Crime, which took about 4 years to make and another 2 to distribute. And in the course of that, I ended up being asked to film a little garden. I didn't know much about it, at an Indian pueblo near Santa Fe where I live. And it was there that I met Gabriel Howarth, the master organic farmer and seed collector who introduced me to biodiversity in the garden. And we went on a couple of years later to found a company called Seeds of Change in 1989.
Yeah.
And I loved film, but it was incredibly frustrating at that time in the late 80s. It was very hard to sell documentaries. It still is today, even though things are better than they were then. And, the film seemed to have a significant impact, but those things are really hard to measure in a way, too, to know how much of an impact you have had. And so in starting Seeds of Change, part of me wanted to do something really practical.
Yeah.
You know? And then a year later, of course, we started Bioneers, and it's always been, you know, we consider the conference to be kind of the live act.
Right,
You know, we're sort of impresarios. It's show business when you get down to it, you know, and we're doing a permanent star search for the greatest talent and innovation in the field of, you know, environment writ large. And then over the years, we've always continued to do media, but now particularly with the explosion of digital media and the opportunity to have so many other and different ways to get information and media out there, you know, the circle has come full circle, as you're kind of indicating. So I continue to love media, and, you know, it's this year with the conference, which of course you'll be participating in, we're doing a fairly significant webcast, and we're very excited to be able to, you know, get that stuff out all over the world simultaneously, and, you know, build a kind of a virtual consciousness. So.
Very good. Okay, let me bring in David Orr. David Orr is the Paul Sears Distinguished Professor of Environmental Studies and Politics and Special Assistant to the President of Oberlin College and a James Marsh Professor at the University of Vermont. He's perhaps best known for his pioneering work on environmental literacy in higher education and his recent work in ecological design. He raised the funds for and spearheaded the effort to design and build a $7.2 million environmental study center at Oberlin College, a building described by the New York Times as the most remarkable of a new generation of college buildings and selected as one of 30 milestone buildings in the 20th century by the U.S. Department of Energy. Or is the author of 6 books, including The Last Refuge, The Corruption of Patriotism in the Age of Terror, The Nature of Design, Earth in Mind, Ecological Literacy, and co-editor of The Global Predicament and The Campus and Environmental Responsibility. Welcome, David Orr.
Well, Terrence, thank you. Nice to be here.
Okay, as you see, I like to get a feel for the people. Can you briefly describe your path to the work that you're doing today? It seems to bring together education, environment, and now design and so on. And when I say your path, what I have always found, or almost always found with guests, is no matter how remarkable their achievements, there were accidents along the way. Accidents that usually led to their achievements is what I'm saying. There are very few people in the history of that I've been doing this have said, I set out to do this and I did A, B, C, and that's where I'm at, you know. So a little bit of your path with, feel free to mention mentors or turning points, moments of decision, that sort of thing.
Well, Terrence, thank you. First of all, it's really nice to be on the show. Like Kenny, I think there's a thread that runs through a good bit of what I've done that is a search for wholeness and how things fit together. And so from the first part of my teaching career in Atlanta through the present job here at Oberlin, I think the real passion I have is how things fit together in wholes and systems. And part of this is serendipity. I lived in Atlanta in the 70s. Eugene Odom, who is the father of modern ecology, became kind of a mentor. We were on the same board together and spent a lot of hours together and talking. And he was the guy that put ecology on the scientific agenda back in late 40s and early 50s with a classic textbook that's still in print on the fundamentals of ecology. And I think more than anything else, that was kind of one of those accidental encounters way back when that set me off on a very different journey than I otherwise would have been on.
Let me just cut in on Odom for a quick second, which is that I remember first I did a documentary on a Buckminster Fuller World Game in 73, and that's when I first became familiar with Odom. And it seemed to me one thing that he did was he actually kind of said it's all about energy, that you can measure what you're doing if you pay attention to the energy that's being expended and the energy that's being given off and energy that's being wasted. Am I right?
Yes, and his brother, Howard Odom, this is a remarkable family. The father was a famous professor at the University of North Carolina, and Eugene Odom was the founder of the Institute of Ecology at Georgia. His brother, Howard, wrote a book called Environment, Power, and Society back in the early 1970s. And began to develop a system of metrics to measure the flows of energy.
So I may have been confusing the two.
Well, they both shared that passion.
Mm-hmm.
Howard was probably a bit more famous in that regard, but it gave us a shorthand to see the human role in the natural world through the eyes of photons and energy and thermodynamics and so forth that otherwise we just don't see.
That's right. I mean, the thing that we always say, which is that people pay attention, what you can measure is what matters, kind of, and so on. And I think that was essential, that it's not just a beautiful system, but you can actually measure it. So return. So it's the early 70s. You have a serendipitous meeting. He's writing about ecology, which at that point is a very new concept on the horizon.
Well, I think for me, one of the big things in my life was a detour from North Carolina, where I was living at that time, to Arkansas, and developing an experimental facility in Arkansas that was designed to be an educational arena in which we had 1,500 acres, and everything that happened within that 1,500 acres became curriculum. It's an old idea. It dates back to John Dewey and Maria Montessori and lots of other people, but that was kind of an unplanned excursion into a very different world. And for me, I think going out to live in the 5th poorest county and the 49th wealthiest state in the Union at the periphery and looking back was a transformative experience. I've never seen the world quite the same since.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what you're saying is that set you on a different path?
Well, it really did. I think the perspective from the periphery looking back at the center of wealth and power was transformative. And I left there, came to Oberlin College in 1990. But I think the passion, as with Kenny and the whole Bioneers effort, has always been to how do you see holes and how to react in a way that generates harmony within large transformative systems. And that's, of course, the moving target. And so for me, that was going outside the system and looking back at it was really fundamental for seeing the world.
And then at some point you end up in education.
Well, I had actually, Terrence, started out in education. I began as a professor at Agnes Scott College, went to the University of North Carolina, and then eventually to Oberlin with the detour route into the Ozarks. But I think I've always been an educator, trying to understand how this particular holistic perspective ought to influence how we teach and how we think, and to take the life of the mind of a person and shape that life or influence in a way that begins to regenerate this larger culture.
Okay, I think that gives us a sense. So what I see in your path, David, educator, but then you take a detour, and that detour colors everything, and yet all of it goes back to, I would imagine, even before you became an educator, this search for harmony and wholeness.
I suspect that's probably in everybody in some fashion.
And less felt and less admitted probably by some who get distracted. Let me go back to you, Kenny, and ask you what's the focus or some major themes or what's particularly exciting to you about the upcoming conference, the one October 14th to 16th in the Bay Area?
How long you got? We don't precisely have a focus in any given year because we really present a kind of kaleidoscopic view, but there tend to be some themes that do, rise to the top. And the meta theme of the conference at large is breakdown to breakthrough, which I think is kind of the passage that we're in for the coming cycle here at large. And, one of the anomalies that I live with is that I have this privilege of being in the catbird seat with Bioneers, where our daily job is a kind of star search to find the greatest work and greatest talent and innovation out there. And so we, just if you do nothing but read the news and or watch TV or the web or whatever, it's pretty dire out there these days by any standard. And I think, when people ask me what is Bioneers, these days I just say it's a natural antidepressant. It's where the hope is.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of what's going to come through. But we've got certainly some, major meta themes, and I'm very delighted and honored David will be, closely part of this. But one of the big themes, our premise since day one has been that the solutions are largely present. And Amory Lovins has his new book coming out, Reinventing Fire, which is basically a national energy plan to be off, coal and oil and nuclear and largely off gas by 2050. And it's a very reality-based, plan. And obviously, Amory can get on the phone at will with, most of the Fortune 50 or Fortune 500 CEOs, and he's taken very, very seriously and has been for a long time. And David has been on the board of Amory's organization, I know, for many years. And David recently, which I hope he'll talk about, helped to launch a national security sustainability initiative. And David's colleague, Colonel Mark Puck Mickleby, who he just resigned to go private, but he was the chief strategic assistant to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And, if you want to look for non-climate deniers, the two first places to look in the U.S. are the U.S. military and the insurance industry.
Exactly. The people who either have to or have the wherewithal to plan ahead and look at the long-term view.
And need to be reality-based because they have to operationalize.
Yep.
So I'm very, very excited about that whole sort of a thread, and I think that it is a national security issue. Homeland security begins with environmental security. And so, and the truth is the solutions are largely present, even off-the-shelf energy technologies. We don't per se have to invent anything new, although that's happening literally on practically an hourly basis now. I mean, it's astounding the breakthroughs that are coming down the pike. So, David, I don't know if you want to comment.
Yeah, let's jump over to David on that one specifically. So this is the a consortium or organization that you have helped spearhead?
Well, it's a wide effort, and it began a number of years ago when people began to understand in the security business that security didn't start at the shores and borders and work out, and that's battle groups and F-16s and aircraft carriers and deployment of troops and so forth. It actually begins, as George Kennan years ago said, in the way we organize our national life. And so it has to do with food and education and electricity and all these things that we take for granted as kind of the foundation of the American dream. And so recently, certainly after 9/11, it became clear that we were vulnerable in lots of ways to both natural hazards and to terrorism and to accidents, and now increasingly to the effects of rapid climate destabilization. And Fukushima, if anybody needed an object lesson, Fukushima recently in the spring was certainly a great object lesson. And you could see the convergence of lots of fairly low probability things into a massive destructive event. And so the dialogue about security has taken a very different turn. It doesn't mean you necessarily don't need armies and air force and military power, but it does mean that the energy policy that you have is a large part of your security, how secure or insecure you might be. The way you create the electric grid makes you vulnerable or less vulnerable. The very need for energy itself creates a dependency that can be converted into risk and hazard, or on one side, on the other, opportunity. So there's a large debate now, I think, within the security community, how we begin to reshape our domestic life to be more secure and prosperous and resilient.
And let me ask a question there, David. Is part of that where it seems, and my guess is if you asked, the man or woman on the street, you'd get this answer, that security, national security and security has been so viewed in terms of military or violent encounters or the defense against such things, that to say we're not talking about when with what you're talking about, energy security, for instance, we're not talking just about getting off of Mideast oil, which would be sort of what you'd see if you looked through the kind of entrenched way people look at security. They go, oh, I see. So we're not dealing with those folks. You're saying that actually security is the power going to be there? Is it going to be dependable and reliable so that our daily life moves forward in a way that works and so on? Am I correct?
Sure. You think about the very need for oil. We consume about twice as much oil, or maybe more, that we actually need. And the dependence then makes us vulnerable to a supply line, and it starts in Saudi Arabia and moves oil around the world to American ports. It's interruptible at any number of places. A boat sunk in the Straits of Hormuz would bring havoc to the world, the global energy markets, as would the appearance of or the appearance of peak oil, where we've simply used more than there was available. And so we're vulnerable at any point along this line. And for years, going back into the 60s at least, a number of analysts have been saying the same thing. Use it sparingly and use it efficiently and make it last much longer. And as Amory Lovins, that Kenny mentioned a few moments ago, to be at the Bioneers conference, has been saying in eloquent and wonderfully supported books, articles, and papers for years, you shouldn't burn oil anyway. These are enormously complex molecules better used for other things, as industrial feedstocks and so forth. So the way the American energy use has been way too high. In 1973, we had a warning with the first Arab oil embargo, but Detroit kept turning out cars with an average fuel efficiency of 13 miles per gallon. And so across the whole range of appliances and everything that uses energy, we've been wasteful. And now we find out that we're facing both scarcity and vulnerability in lots of forms.
Mm-hmm. And so this is the role of energy in our vision of security. And go a little bit more to how defense is interested in this.
Well, to make a long story short, the Defense Department, there's no Army robust enough or Air Force strong enough, or there's no military power that can save us from our own folly. And in a world that is full of angry people, and we've democratized the means of destruction and so forth, then the Pentagon simply can't defend us. The National Security Estimate, I think it was 2007, in a classified portion, said that the electric grid will go down. It wasn't a matter of whether it goes down, it's when it goes down. And for lots of reasons, it will not come back up quickly. And so once somebody has darkened the East Coast or the West Coast or whatever, it's going to stay dark for a long time. And you think about that. You can't pump gasoline. You can't use a credit card. You can't turn on a furnace or an air conditioner. And so we've made ourselves incredibly brittle, to use Amory Lovin's word 30 years ago. So the issue now is, how do we begin to build a resilient society? And the good news is, as Kenny pointed out, I think Bioneers has been a wonderful platform for people, the most innovative and creative people on the planet. We have the ideas and the technologies to begin to build a resilient society that's fair and decent and, by the way, it won't change climate either, but to power civilization by sunshine and efficiency and begin to redevelop local capabilities that were once very robust.
Okay, I'm going to come back, Kenny, at a point to you and talk a little bit more about Bioneers going global and some of those other initiatives. But while I've got you, David, talking about resilience and energy from the sun and so on, the building that I mentioned in introducing you, the environmental studies building at Oberlin, tell us that story, because for one thing, I'm sure there's a story to how something like that happens, how one galvanizes and solidifies support for something like that. But then the achievement is such an optimistic achievement.
Well, the story began in 1995. I was charged with developing a home for the environmental studies program at Oberlin College, and we did several things that were very unique. One was we assembled an incredible design team that included people like Bill McDonough and Amory Lovins and John Todd and Carol Franklin, and about 25 people that were really the A team of ecological design at the time. And the other thing we did was to pull together students and faculty and townspeople and anybody in the region and said, look, if you'd like to be part of the building, come on in. And so the first planning meetings are what designers call charrettes. Included about 250 students and townspeople and so forth that wanted to be part of this building enterprise. And we took this as, very much as Kenny described this, as an exercise in applied hope. And through the context of a single building, it's only 13,700 square feet, so it's not a large structure. We aim to create a building that would, in the words of one of the people involved in this, would cause no ugliness, human or ecological, somewhere else at some later time. Can you power a building in northern Ohio by sunshine? Can you make it a zero-discharge building, eliminate toxics around the building, and make it a place that, by the way it's designed and operated, becomes itself educational, not just a place where you have classes and so forth. And so we did it. And it took 3 years to get it up and built. And the main a building is still going to be a building. The main impact of that particular structure was on the lives and minds of the people who worked on it and the kids who went through the program and still do. Last year it was named by a panel of 150 architects as the most important green building in the past 30 years. But it's important in my mind because of its effect on the students and the lives of the people that have seen it and participated in it. And now we're taking that project and what we're calling the Oberlin Project is an effort to do the same thing on a much larger scale in a city of about 10,000 and ask the same kinds of questions. Can you power a whole city on sunshine and efficiency? Can you rebuild an economy based on nature's laws and principles, not those of industrial agriculture? And can you make the whole thing educational and so forth? So we've taken that and we're now scaling it up to the size of a small city.
And let me ask a little bit about that. That in the summer of 2009 is when the college initiated this, or did they go to the city and say, "What do you think? Shall we do this?" Or was it mutual from birth?
Well, it began out of conversations with the college and the city, and I drafted a proposal that basically describes the principles of the Oberlin Project. And they're drawing very much from what Kenny and Nina have done at Bioneers, and you know, we've got this kind of who's who of people that are now part of a kind of a global ecological enlightenment. And any given year at Bioneers, they show up in droves, and that's what makes Bioneers so exciting. It really is a laboratory of applied hope and people doing things all over the world. Anyway, we took this to the city and the college, got buy-in. They're both co-partners in this larger effort, each with different responsibilities, but we've been at this now a little bit over 2 years, and it is moving massively well.
And
Terrence, if I could just add to what David's saying, part of what I think is structurally really significant about what he's doing is that it's an alliance, it's a town-gown partnership between a college and the city in which it operates for restoration, from the bottom up, basically. And there are 4,100 colleges and universities in the country. If even a significant fraction of those were to undertake this kind of a town-gown partnership to dream their place, and David's got a very practical plan, or the Oberlin Project does, for how to go carbon neutral by 2020 or something around that time, I think, with a plan to do it, the how, and how to build an agroforestry belt and become much more self-reliant in relation to your food. And all of this, by the way, is about creating the next economy, which is, of course, a green economy. And it has to be driven by that. If we're not able to create jobs and livelihoods, we're frankly irrelevant. So,
and what we're talking about is, and tell me about this, David, because obviously when I think of Ohio, I think of an area that's been hard hit by the move of manufacturing out of the United States. Does that apply to a town like Oberlin?
Absolutely. I think one of the goals we've got in this project is to show right in the middle of the Rust Belt.
Yeah.
The city has a very high poverty level, and we want to show that in the heart of the Rust Belt, with Detroit 75 miles away on one side, Cleveland 35 miles away on the other side, you can begin to use the principles of the Bioneers and ecological design and so forth to reconstitute and rejuvenate an economy that works powered by sunshine. And so the attempt here is to make this what somebody called full spectrum sustainability. We've gone about a lot of these things as a series of one-off projects. So we did agriculture and then forestry and energy, but we very seldom, if ever, pull them together as parts of a system where each of the components reinforce the resilience and prosperity of the whole thing.
And of course, what's interesting, or sort of perplexing about that is that, of course, that is the initial lesson of nature, isn't it?
Yeah, you're going back to the earlier conversation. I mean, this is implicit in the work of Gene and Howard Odom, and all the way up through the current agenda of people that will be at Bioneers this next month. And the goal here is to give it. We're creatures so much dependent on things that we see, touch, feel, experience. And I think people can begin to see sustainability working as a whole system, not simply as an abstraction that a few people toss around at conferences, but it's the way they live. It becomes the default setting. And so the goal here is to begin to change the rules and regulations, perceptions, and feedback loops and so forth so that sustainability, whatever that means, becomes easy. And doing things in the old industrial model dependent on the extractive economy is the hard thing to do.
One thing I really like is that, and Kenny knows this well, is that I remember when I first came in contact with Bioneers, which now is maybe 10, 12 years ago, something like that, I really thought of it as an environmental conference. I thought of the whole notion as environmental and so on. But over the years, I really see that the idea, if there is a central or an essential idea here, it's to learn from nature. It's to learn within nature. It's to work within nature. And to me, if people continue to think of that as somehow about the environment, whatever that means to them, they're missing the point. And in fact, we're all aiming way too low. That actually, this whole idea of interdependent systems and natural flows and as you said, the new way of being sustainable versus the old way of being extractive, that to me, people have to begin to think about those things, talk about those things, and just the whole association of those things is not about the environment. It's not just about the stream or the forest nearby or anything like that. It's about the whole way that humans live on this planet. Either one of you want to take that?
Sure. I mean, it's really pretty basic. We didn't invent nature. Nature invented us, and we'd be wise to learn the ground rules and how to play by them. And we are nature. There is no separation. And, if there's one single systems error in our thinking in our societies and civilization, it's this delusion that we're somehow separate from nature or, are exceptional to the rules of the game, that we don't have to play. It's just not the case. And, the simplest way to understand it is that taking care of nature means taking care of people, and taking care of people means taking care of nature.
Exactly.
And, what you're describing, Terrence, is, when we started in 1990, we started with a field that didn't have a name at the time. Later, Janine Benyus called it biomimicry. But, nature has done everything we want to do without mining the past, polluting the planet and mortgaging the future. And there's huge learning coming from this. It's a true scientific revolution in terms of design science now. And there are also a lot of lessons we can learn about how nature organizes that are relevant to how we set up our societies. Just everything that we've been talking about so far, this idea of resilience. And, we're in for massive shocks from here on, shocks to every kind of system that we have. And most of them are pretty brittle, and they're not really built to last here. So, nature builds from the bottom up. When we talk about something like the Oberlin Project, the more resilience you can build at the local and regional level, the better. Yet at the same time, it's a global system in a globalized world. So it's always going to be a both-and proposition. But, once you look to nature, it's not some romantic or 19th century notion. It's actually a very 21st century notion at this point. And with the kind of scientific tools that we have and technologies today, the learning is just proceeding beyond imagination in terms of what we're capable of actually understanding at this point, and then obviously better able to work with it.
I subscribe daily to a thing called Gizmag. It's a technology review, and they send out, there's like 8 stories a day or something like that. And what has been so wonderful to watch over the last couple of years is how often one of their stories is a story of biomimicry. That in other words, I don't think Gizmag or even the people who do it think of themselves as in the biomimicry field or searching that. But it is, as I say, just time and again, some sort of new technology that is modeled on or conceived of based in mimicking nature. Let me take you, David, I want to go back to the Oberlin project and the Oberlin College project you did and ask you how those are serving as models and how you and others are attempting to get both, as Kenny mentioned, 4,100 colleges, I think, in America, get other colleges to follow that model. And then, of course, there's innumerable cities, get other cities to follow what you're doing with the Oberlin Project. How is progress in that regard?
Well, on the Adam Joseph Lewis Center, which is the environmental studies building that we did in the late 1990s, that kind of replicated itself. We lost track at about 250 buildings around the country that had used it as a model. But we didn't make any particular attempt to try to sell that or propagate the model. It just went word of mouth. And we had, in the first year after the building was done, we had about 40,000 visitors that came by. Total serendipity. We didn't even have a staff person to do tours. And that took us by surprise. On the Oberlin Project, one of the things we are doing, and Kenny's been part of this conversation as well, is to put together a national network of similar kind of projects at varying scales and very different circumstances. So what Kenny has done in New Mexico, the Dreaming New Mexico project, and work that Andy Lipkus has done in Los Angeles, and our partner in this effort, Colonel Mickleby from the Marine Corps, is doing in Beaufort, South Carolina, and so forth. But imagine a network, again, from the bottom up, as Kenny described this, of sites, cities, and projects, communities at all different scales, sizes, and circumstances, linked in a kind of a network. I mean, imagine this as kind of a sustainability Tea Party movement, but in this case powered by sunshine and science. But people linking this enormous creativity at the grassroots level. And it's hard to walk into any community and not find all kinds of people beginning to do things that range from urban gardening to energy projects to, you name it. And begin to link those energies together into a national force. And it hits that to a much bigger vision of what this country can be when it does, in fact, grow up. And so it's bottom up, but there ought to be a vision of some kind of larger America in the world. I don't mean necessarily in terms of military power,
sure,
but a country that in fact leads by its moral example. And I think that vision was implicit in many people's writings, but for me one of my favorites is the writings of George Kennan, the great diplomat that gave us the word containment back in the 1940s, but wrote very eloquently about what national security and the national mission, what America can be. But imagine this starting at the grassroots, and instead of out of animosity and bitterness and division, it begins in the vision of what we can begin to do locally, and then link these sites, cities, and projects, literally hundreds across the country. So we're working to develop that network.
Let me go back to you, Kenny, and tell us a bit about Dreaming New Mexico, which, it's so funny. If you weren't doing Bioneers, I'm sure Dreaming New Mexico could be a full-time.
Yeah, it's a challenge, I'll tell you that. I just was amused by what David was saying, too, because I hadn't thought of it as a tea party, but maybe it's the green tea party,
The healthy tea.
Yes, exactly. The Dreaming New Mexico, the basic idea, my partner Peter Warschau has been instrumental in this, whom I'm sure many of your listeners know, but we looked at the state from a systems perspective.
And let me just get a couple of figures. What's the population in New Mexico?
2 million.
2 million, okay.
Very large physically, however.
Exactly, okay.
Yeah.
A lot of physical resources, a lot of physical challenges, 2 million people spread out. Okay.
And very multicultural. Of course, the native population here is ancient. We're all the newcomers. The conquistadores, came in the 1500s, basically, and the actual Spanish element of the population, not Mexican or Latino, it's really truly Spanish, is also very deeply established here, very strong culture. And then, of course, in the 60s, Los Hippies, came along. And
came to Taos, yes.
Right, all of that. But very interesting, unusual place, very diverse. And the idea essentially was to try to, how do you reconcile human organization with nature at the state level from a really functional, operational point of view. And we started with the energy system and then looked at the food system, and the premise is that dreaming the future can create the future. And most of the time, those of us involved in progressive social change feel compelled into a mode of resistance of just trying to stop all the destruction from happening, which is a very worthy endeavor. But you don't step back and ask, what would success look like? What do we really want? What's the dream?
And let me cut in for 1 second, because I certainly agree with what you're saying, is that there does seem to be a sense of constantly playing defense. And one of the errors that I think, or one of the flaws in that, is that if you talk about the vision and if you talk about what you hope for, if you may end up that actually the people who think they're your opponents realize they're your allies. Whereas when you're fighting tactical battles, those roles seem comfortable.
That's right. And, one of the most powerful things, we used a combination. There is also quite, apart from the Bioneers website, there's a website called dreamingnewmexico.org. And all of the materials are posted there. But we did very complex, very thorough, and well-researched mapping of the entire energy and food systems, and then capped that with convenings, where we actually tried to bring many of the key stakeholders to the table, just as you're describing, across business, government, civil society, academia, citizens, engaged citizens. And no one had ever done that before, it turned out, to actually have the whole system in the room all at once. And it really completely changes the game. And people start to see themselves first and foremost as a system, which is the beginning point.
Mm-hmm.
And then many, dreams start to arise in solutions. And these are doable dreams. This isn't fantasy it's very practical, achievable stuff. It's mostly a matter of will and economic, muscle behind it. But without going into detail about the what of what we've done, what we're currently doing, there are a couple of things. One is that we're actually within a couple of weeks of completing a methodology about how to do this kind of mapping, because we had so many inquiries from around the country and around the world, actually, for how do you go about this, because a lot of it is a very technical process. And given tools now like Google Earth and all kinds of things, there are amazing things you can do to really know your place.
That, as you're saying, that even setting out to do this 10 or 15 years ago would have been more difficult.
Oh, absolutely.
That the moment is not only a moment of need, but for more than one reason, a moment of opportunity.
That's right. And so anyway, we'll be publishing this methodology in the next few weeks, I think by mid-October, something like that. And then we've also taken the materials and we're translating them into curriculum materials, lesson plans and study guides that are the kind of thing that David advocates for, which is project-based learning, where you don't just study a problem, you actually go out and immerse in it and try to actually solve it or address it. And so it's action-based. In other words, we have this huge, we're never going to create enough green jobs in the immediate foreseeable future to meet the magnitude of the work that needs to be done. So we're going to have to get real creative about how we mobilize a lot more people. And one big population, of course, is students and educators who could certainly be out doing the work while also studying it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a very important component. And then the other thing that we're working on is actually really of special significance to the western states, but really to the whole country, which is that the Four Corners area of New Mexico, where Navajo Nation is located, crossing Arizona and New Mexico, Scientific American identified a 95 square mile region there as the top solar site in the country, one of the top in the world, that actually could generate enough concentrated solar power to power the entire U.S. electricity grid.
In those four corners, in that area.
In that one area.
Yeah.
And, of course, Navajo Nation is the tragic object of really negative, exploitive, extractive energy generation from uranium to coal, and two of the top 50 worst coal plants in the country are there, really bad. And the opportunity is to turn those wounds into gifts, quite literally, and take some of the abandoned mine sites and fill them with solar collectors. And we're working for the second time with Google Earth, Rebecca Moore, who will be at the conference this year, and we'll be talking about this project as well. And we're actually mapping the solar potential using Google Earth so that you can visibly see, and this will be very powerful for people who, of course, live there to understand the power of their place in this new context. and that this could really, truly change the country and, in fact, the world. In many of the Western states, including, I think, 30% of your energy in L.A., something like that, a good chunk of it comes from these coal plants in Four Corners.
Mm-hmm. I know. Yes.
We're talking to you.
Yeah.
So, these are the kinds of game-changing things that we're really trying to look at. And then there's a whole area that we're working in around eco-services, which is another big breakthrough area that's about to pop. In fact, the Harvard Business Review has a great new article by Yvonne Chenard from
Patagonia.
Yeah. And they've been doing business is shifting. It's happening before our eyes after a couple decades of slow motion, but motion. But it's really turning. And one of the things is about taking externalities into the balance sheet.
Oh my God! I mean, yes. And I'm sure all three of us have been banging our heads against that one for as long as we can remember. For anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, that basically in economics, externalities are those things that don't show up on your balance sheet. For instance, the pollution you produce that may cost your community, your citizens, perhaps your state and nation. And in terms of climate change, perhaps everyone doesn't show up on your balance sheet. The damage you may do to a community, won't show up. All these sorts of things, and so companies figure their profit and loss without recognizing the cost to others and the cost to that in which they're embedded. Externalities is the notion of actually beginning to bring those costs so that the polluter pays, the despoiler pays.
That's right. And just to give you a sense of the shift that's happening, Dow Chemical is putting up $10 million to map how their business is affected by eco-services and biodiversity. Now, that has not happened before. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and eco-services, let me just bring that one to people's attention. Basically, much of the time when we think of what the environment does for us, we think of its beauty, its peacefulness, its value as resources and so on. But it turns out that even more valuable are the services that nature provides in terms of flood control, in terms of air purification, in terms of water purification, and so on. And that these services, only I think recognized in the last 10 or 15 years and begin to be valued, actually bring home to us in a much, much bigger way how dependent we are and how you cannot these are irreplaceable services.
Yeah, no, I mean, every one of these things to me just speaks to, breakdown to breakthrough. It's really shifting and it's on the way. And, the sooner we shift, the more options we're going to have and the less suffering. It's real straightforward. And we're going to be building a strong, resilient economy and work that actually matters, where we need everybody needs to play, all hands on deck.
Right. There is, when you really begin to think about solving problems on this scale, this idea that we don't have employment, that there aren't jobs for people, kind of, looks like it's a problem of allocation. It's a problem of application. It's not a problem. It's not reality.
No, that's right. And just to connect with one thing that David was saying too, and there's a wonderful new book out that I would recommend for people called Global Action Networks. And basically, networks are kind of what run the world. It's nature's favorite form of organization, and it's equally true in the human realm. And one thing that we're very, Bioneers over the past 20-plus years has become this network of networks because we really do look at the system as an interdependent whole, as David was saying earlier. And activating these networks is very important now. This is how social change really accelerates. And we're having a prototype this year at the conference for a national educators network, Education for Action. And presuming that that's successful, we're looking to continue to, activate these kinds of things. And, when people come to the conference, it's really not a spectator sport. Just about everybody there, whether it's professional or personal, is deeply engaged. And it's a great opportunity to meet other people, get connected, find new ideas, connect to new networks. We know of about 10 marriages that originated in Pioneers.
Yeah. People who go to business conferences and so on, that everyone always says that the most fruitful things are in the halls and in the receptions and so on. And what's interesting here is that unlike a network that's just about, how do I advance my field or this sort of thing, it really is a very lively it's much more undefined than that. It's like you will find the person that you're sitting next to who lives across the country doing something that will help you do what you're trying to do where you are, and that sort of thing. It's the people who tend to show up, and about 3,000 or 3,500.
Yeah, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, those three people, those people that are there for those 3 days, are your allies, and you even were the program not on for some reason, if it didn't happen, you would still leave hopeful.
Yeah, no, it's kind of like the bar scene in Star Wars, you know.
In terms of the range.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let me see, I've got about 2 minutes left. Let me give you each 1 minute. Sort of what's the thing that's giving you the most hope right now in your life, David?
Well, I think it's the kind of thing that Bioneers represents. And Bioneers is a snapshot of what I think is a global enlightenment and transition. And the headlines don't tell you much about that. You have to dig way back in the paper or go to other information sources to find out what the real news is. And I think Bioneers is a wonderful capsule summary of this global revolution in human capabilities and perspectives. And I think an emerging, with all the conflict on the planet, an emerging good-heartedness that will drive this. And it's an affiliation with our future, with children, and with other life forms, and seeing ourselves as connected in nature. And that goes back to the last comment to the first thing that we said, this search for connectedness and for systems and engagement.
Very good. Kenny, what's giving you the most hope these days?
Yeah, I would very much echo that. I mean, the people and the work, the brilliance of it, and the heart and the courage behind it is just extraordinary. And, you know, when we started the conference in 1990, you could pretty much know everybody in a given field. It was often a very small handful of people. And now I can't even keep up with one field, you know. The rate of people doing amazing work is just escalating on an almost daily basis. And the other huge hope for me, and this is one of the most powerful presentations we'll see this year, John Liu, who's based in Beijing, is really large-scale ecosystem restoration. And his particular one is in the Lus Plateau, a huge area in China that was literally desertified by negative human impacts. And in 15 years has been turned back into a fertile oasis using very low-tech, simple land management practices and large-scale volunteer forces. And you can take the worst wounds on the planet and regenerate them really fast. Nature has a profound capacity for healing, you know, beyond what we imagine. And once we begin to work with nature rather than fight nature, amazing things are possible in very rapid time frames, and I just got a lot of hope from that.
Wonderful. So again, Bioneers takes place October 14th to 16th in San Rafael, California. You can learn more about that at bioneers.org, bioneers.org. And a couple of David Orr's excellent books are Ecoliteracy and Earth in Mind, and his website is davidorr.com. You can also learn about all the kinds of things we were talking about in terms of the Oberlin Project and the building at Oberlin College. You can listen to this week's conversation and many others anytime during the week by linking to the podcast. You can sign up to have it delivered to you weekly. For podcast articles and transcripts of interviews, and to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to TerenceMcNally.net, 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 or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. They're the same website. You can find the podcast there or at iTunes. You can sign up there at iTunes to have it delivered to you weekly. You can sign up at the site or by emailing me at TeMcNally, TeMcNally, at mac.com. Thank you to Ken Ausubel and David Orr. Keep up your good work.
Thank you. Thank you.